Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Elena, and I'm very honored and excited to be a part of the Animal Behavior Month. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate. I am very excited to share a little bit of my work with you all the way from Croatia. Today, I will be talking about the human-animal relationships, or more specifically, the keeper-animal relationships between zookeepers and the animals in their care. In addition, I will also explain the difference between human-animal relationships and human-animal bonds. I will talk about why positive human-animal relationships and even human-animal bonds are important and the potential that they have not only for facilitating our work as zookeepers, zoo researchers, veterinarians, or other zoo workers and professionals, but also, and perhaps a lot more importantly, the potential of positive relationships as enrichment, so to increase the welfare of animals in our care, to diminish or even prevent behavioral issues. Finally, I will talk about something that is too often overlooked, and that is the well-being of animal caretakers. So stay tuned. Before we start, I would like to take a minute to just very briefly introduce myself. So who am I and why do I find this topic interesting? And also what even qualifies me to research or talk about human-animal relationships to begin with? So as you can see here, my educational background includes two master's degrees. One is in psychology and the other one is in primatology, or more specifically primate conservation. These two were then followed by a primatological PhD, and while a lot of my recent work has focused on ecology and behavior, I remain interested and involved in the human-animal interface. One of my first research projects, and one which I will talk about first today, was a study of human-animal relationships between zoo-housed western lowland gorillas and their keepers. If you are interested, you can read more detailed accounts of this study in the publications I have listed below. In this photo, you can see my gorgeous boys and the stars of my study, Kivu, Ndove, Kiondo, Matadi, and Pertinax, who has sadly passed away recently. But yeah, they were just the most amazing study participants, subjects, however we prefer to call them, and I'm forever grateful to them and to their zookeepers. And I always say without them, there would be no study, no MSc for me. So thank you, gorillas. Thank you, everyone at Paignton Zoo. In the second part of my talk, I will focus on the relationships and in some cases bonds that I developed with the animals that I currently take care of at the Zagreb Zoo in Croatia. One of them is Max, a young Californian sea lion male with whom I have one of the most fulfilling relationships. In addition to my role as a zookeeper and animal trainer, I'm also a university lecturer, which is something I thoroughly enjoy as well. Here you can see me during a medical training with Max on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, as I don't have any photos of my uni lectures, I have included one of myself teaching a field course in biodiversity and conservation with Operation Wallacea this summer. Okay, so before we dive into the depth of human-animal relationships, I would like to just briefly tell you what inspired my professional interest in them. This is a photo of my now co-worker Damir with a black howler monkey female Baloo. Before I did my master's in primatology, I spent a little over a year volunteering at the Zagreb Zoo, where I now work. And something I noticed eventually with time is that there were differences in the interactions of each of the keepers with the animals that they took care of. And while they behaved differently, what I found even more fascinating and important was that animals behaved differently in their presence as well. It soon became quite clear to me that the relationships that I was observing were very different, and you could always make a lot of conclusions about how particular keepers worked and cared for these animals just by observing the animals' behavior in their presence. presence. So seeing them approach the keepers or not approach them, and even just observing them on the day on which different keepers were working, I could always tell, and I wasn't the only one. It's not a me thing. I think it's something that you might find quite obvious as well, working with animals and observing others working with animals. I feel like you can kind of always tell. So, what is a human-animal relationship? It is a mutual relationship between a human and a non-human animal. These relationships develop over time through repeated human-animal interactions, which in zoo context means the interactions between animals and primarily their zookeepers, but also their veterinarians and other zoo staff. The history of these interactions enables both the animals and the people to build expectations and make predictions of the future. They learn what they can expect from each other, and then that informs their behavior as well as their mental states. It is also important to note that past interactions on either side with other people and other animals might also play a role in the development of any subsequent relationships, especially in the beginning. Human-animal relationships range from negative to neutral and positive. And of course, positive is the ideal condition, and I hope positive relationships are something that we all strive for in our work and in our daily lives. And of course, as I mentioned before, you don't always get to start from zero, so from an animal that is happy and healthy and just ready to build with you. Sometimes instead you will have to work to put an effort into overcoming the previous negative experiences that your animals have had with other people in their lives. We all know the stories of animals who just don't seem to like people of particular gender or even of particular looks, and this is likely a result of past negative interactions with people having those characteristics. On the other hand, they can sometimes show a preference for seemingly random features, for example, blonde hair, and it's possibly because they were once cared for or even reared by a person with blonde hair. Now, while I believe that we all try our best to never develop a negative relationship, they are sometimes present, and sometimes you cannot avoid it because they can even be a starting point for you when you come to work. You take over an animal that has been poorly cared for or an animal that has suffered a trauma. Negative relationships develop as a result of unpleasant past interactions with people, and they are characterized by high fear and high avoidance. This is one of the reasons why I think it is very, very important to learn to read and speak the language of the species in our care. We need to be able to understand them so that we know what they're telling us, what they're signaling, and that way we can act accordingly and not only build positive relationships, but also keep them and ourselves safe during our interactions. Neutral relationships, they are those that have developed as a result of no particularly positive or negative interactions. You will see this sometimes among the keepers who kind of, as we say, do the bare minimum. So they provide the food and the water, they clean the enclosures, and then ta-da, they're done. That is all from them. And if these husbandry tasks are performed without any negative stimuli, so they're not scaring the animals on purpose or kind of enticing them, the animals have no reason to be afraid, so they show no fear. They already know what they can expect, but they will also keep their distance as they also have no particular reason to approach and to seek contact. They know there's no special rewards coming and their focus is elsewhere, maybe if there is a group of animals on each other or on something else. Finally, positive relationships develop through a history of pleasant past interactions, and these animals typically show high confidence, low fear of their keeper, and signs of positive welfare. Something that I really want to say here, as I have mentioned welfare now, it is very, very important to keep track of your animal's welfare and well-being. It is sadly very much possible that sometimes you will have given your best and then some, but it is just not translated into positive welfare. So you can offer the best of food, a lot of water, suitable enclosures, suitable social structure, dynamics, plenty of various types of enrichment, positive challenges, and you can still fall short. However, opposite is also the case, and sometimes even in far less than ideal condition, animals can seem to thrive. So yeah, the takeaway message would be to regularly assess your animal's welfare and work towards implementing possible solutions to any issues that arise whenever necessary. Something that I believe to be the crown jewel of getting to work with animals are, of course, the bonds that we form. Human-animal bonds are mutually beneficial relationships, and they are essential to the health and well-being of both, so both the people and the animals. They are reciprocal, they persist over time, but the question that poses itself is, how do we know that a bond has been established? So there are several ways to kind of assess this. One is an indirect way. We can interview the zookeepers, and then there is a direct way of observing their interactions with the animals. Something that is necessary to the formation of a human-animal bond is mutual individual recognition. So this means that people, zookeepers namely, have to be able to distinguish the animals within a group, which can sometimes be easy, sometimes it can be quite hard at the beginning. And of course, it goes both ways, so the animals have to be able to distinguish their keepers. It is possible that animals develop positive relationships and even bonds with one keeper, but not with the others. And also, the relationships that they develop with their keepers can sometimes differ from those that they develop with the veterinarians. If you think about zoos, in comparison to like other captive settings, for example, laboratories and sanctuaries, zoos are quite a strange setup, and the animals at the zoo are daily exposed to people with who they have different levels of familiarity. So their main keepers, of course, are likely the most familiar to them. However, there's also other zoo staff, and often in the same uniform. But studies show that many species are able to differentiate between their keepers and other staff. Of course, other than them, there's also a large number of mostly completely unfamiliar people, and those, of course, are the zoo visitors. And we all know that the so-called visitors effect is in most cases a negative influence on animals' welfare. But well, some studies show that positive relationships are connected with better overall welfare, which would mean that animals that have developed positive relationships with their keepers might overall exhibit less pathology in their behavior. The positive relationship of animals and their keepers doesn't necessarily translate into positive relationship towards visitors. So, what are some of the variables that are related to positive human-animal relationships? Firstly, if we consider the animal side, some species are more often reported as those with whose keepers have been able to develop particularly positive relationship. Namely, these are primates, particularly apes, of course, but there's also large carnivores. Animals' personality may also play a role, and anyone who works with animals will likely be able to tell you that even within species, there are often huge differences in personality and behavior, just as with people. And of course, as a result, not everyone can get along as well with everyone else. This is completely normal and expected, nothing to panic about, but it is also very important for me to note here that correlation does not imply causation. So perhaps people seek out and invest more of themselves into the relationship with animals of particular species or with particular personality profiles. On the human side of things, more positive relationships have been found to be connected with higher education and more animal-related education. Also, higher job experience, higher job satisfaction, and more positive attitudes towards animals. Again, however, it is possible that people who have positive relationships with the animals they care for are simply more interested in furthering their education, also in staying in their jobs longer, and also, therefore, this is the reason why they might have more job experience. Of course, job satisfaction might also be a result of a good relationship or good relationships that they have formed. Also something that inspires them to give more of themselves, to continue to give more of themselves at their jobs and, of course, particularly to their animals. Positive attitudes, again, they might be a result of good relationships as well as the reason for putting an effort into developing them in the first place. Okay, now I will tell you a little bit about the study of human-animal relationships, or better, keeper-animal relationships that I conducted at Paignton Zoo. for my master's degree that I did at Oxford Brookes University in England. So I was interested firstly in examining the gorilla-related and keeper-related variables that might play a role in developing a positive relationship. And then I also was interested in examining whether this positive relationship might be correlated to proportions of their abnormal behavior. So essentially, I wanted to see if positive relationships could be a type of an enrichment, so something that decreases prevalence of pathological or abnormal behavior or even prevents it. I began my study by conducting behavioral observations from a bachelor group of gorillas, which I have introduced to you at the beginning of today's presentation. At the time of my data collection, the gorillas were going through a change in hierarchy, which is why I also decided to study their social interactions and their group dynamics. I collected behavioral data over 520 hours using scan sampling, which means that I was able to observe and record the behavior of all 5 males at the same time. This was possible due to the design and the layout of their enclosures. I used instantaneous recording, and I recorded their behavior every 5 minutes. Their social interactions are recorded ad libitum, but they will not be the focus of today's presentation. The reason why I collected behavioral data was that I wanted to be able to assess the proportion of abnormal behavior, so any pathologies, within each male's activity budget, and this would be important for studying the potential role of a positive human-animal relationship as enrichment, as this would enable me to correlate the proportion of an abnormal behavior and the number of positive relationships that a particular gorilla has had with its keepers. To kind of assess the human side of things, I also conducted semi-structured interviews with the gorilla's keepers. During this time, I inquired about their relationships with each of the gorillas, and to kind of assess some of the keeper-related variables, I also asked about their educational background, their work experience, and also how often they worked with the gorillas to begin with. In addition, I asked them to describe their relationship with each of the gorillas, rate them as friendly or unfriendly, and describe their behaviors during typical daily interactions such as feeding, husbandry procedures, for example cleaning and so on, and if applicable, training as well. Of course, I am aware that this is not an ideal or a sufficient method on its own, and pairing these interviews with an observation of each keeper's interactions with each of the gorillas would have given a much better and more accurate understanding of all of these relationships. But as this was only a master's study, I was somewhat limited. Also, I do not aim to hurt anyone's feelings by saying that direct observations of keeper-gorilla interactions would have been quote-unquote better or quote-unquote more accurate, but talking to keepers really only tells us one side of the story, and as we all know, relationships are two-way streets, and the only way to really kind of quote-unquote ask the gorillas what they think and how they perceive these relationships is to observe how they act. Finally, I also asked the keepers to rate each of the gorillas' personality on a Gorilla Behavior Index, which is a personality inventory for gorillas that uses behavior-based adjectives and identifies 4 personality factors: extroverted, dominant, fearful, and understanding. It has previously been used in the construction of personality profiles which were then utilized to aid management for captive rodent gorillas. If you're interested in that, I have linked on the previous slides one of my papers which deals with this particular part of my study, so please go ahead and take a look. The results of this study showed that just over half of all the examined keeper-gorilla relationships were positive. And while personality didn't play an important role in this study, I was able to detect several aspects of positive human-animal relationships that were present in the majority of them. So firstly, training appeared to have an important role, which I think is in line with many previous studies. Hand feeding was another important feature of positive relationships, and to no surprise, gorillas with which keepers reported having positive relationships were more often described as friendly. Again, unsurprisingly, positive relationships were characterized by fewer difficulties in daily management. Something that is often outside of our hands is, of course, the rearing history of the animals in our care. In this case, in this study, in this gorilla group, 4 out of 5 gorillas had been hand-reared, And incidentally, keepers described these relationships, so relationships with these gorillas, as more positive. If you remember from a couple of slides ago, animals' past interactions, or in this case their life history, are important and they can affect animals' subsequent relationships with humans. This study, of course, did not answer all of the questions that one might have regarding the human-animal relationships. Firstly, it was a case study. Of course, a larger, more diverse sample of both gorillas and zookeepers would have covered a lot more ground and likely revealed more in terms of what human-animal relationships are like. However, before I continue, I just want to say that despite sometimes being harder to publish or even validate to your supervisors or funding agencies, I think case studies are very, very important, and sometimes it's very easy to kind of get carried away and kind of just go for a very large sample, very large data set, and that's fine as well. But I think case studies have a very important place within studying, especially kind of human-animal interactions or anything really related to zoos, because all the animals are different, all the people are different, all the different contexts are different as well. And sometimes by doing case studies in different places and then combining them later on, or just creating or contributing to a larger body of research, you get so much better and deeper results, deeper understanding of things. So just one advice from my short career, don't shy away from qualitative approach, don't shy away from case studies. I think they're also very, very important. And in the end, I think it's good to just go for the approach and the study design that best answers your research question. Okay, so in this study, I was also unable to confirm the relationship between positive human-animal relationships and welfare. The reason for this is that the prevalence of abnormal behavior was very low for all of the gorillas. And personally, of course, I love that. I think it's a very good thing, and I was very happy to kind of see that all of the gorillas were at the time doing quite well, despite all the social turmoil. Also, as I already mentioned, to get a better rounded picture of the human-animal relationships, observations of human-animal interactions should be added to the study design. So results of my study, as well as other studies, show that particular aspects of husbandry style are correlated to positive human-animal relationships. And of course, training is something that is very often mentioned in this context. But it got me thinking, what if, besides training, only spending time with the animal is enough? So something that often predates training is exactly that, spending time with the animals. And that is especially the case if our animals have never been trained before or if they are shy. And of course, we need to habituate them before we can start training them. And I will talk about this more in a minute. But also, what about the types of training or the purpose of training? Does it matter what we teach our animals? Is medical training perhaps the most useful because it not only allows regular and, might I say, quite intimate interactions, but it also facilitates future medical examinations and procedures, thus lowering animal stress? Also, speaking of friendly, what do keepers mean when they classify their animals as friendly or unfriendly? What traits, what behaviors they base their opinions in? Something to be researched. What about more zookeeper-related variables, such as their personality, expectations, their friendliness? Also, I was wondering, after this study, how can we help facilitate positive human-animal relationships with other staff, for example, veterinarians? So I included this photo, which I found on the internet, kind of took it from there, because I think it really illustrates well some of the struggles that people who work at zoos kind of encounter, have encountered, or will encounter in their lives when they mention they work at a zoo. So I know it's happened to me before. I'll meet someone, I'll tell them I work as a zookeeper, I train animals, and then the first question I get, if they're kind of a non-professional, somebody who doesn't necessarily work with animals, they'll ask, oh, so you spend all of your day playing with animals, stroking them? And I have to explain that, well, in some ways, I mean, let's not lie, yes, we do play with them, but at the same time, it's not kind of the main purpose or the main thing that we do there. Also, there is this kind of element of fear and worry usually from people who are close to us. And I know I've experienced this from my immediate family. They're always like, oh, how are you not afraid of these animals? Be careful, be careful, be careful. And what I tell them is also what I always tell my students. If you're afraid of your animals, you won't be able to work with them. And something to kind of consider when we talk about negative human-animal relationships, we have mentioned already today, they're characterized by fear and by avoidance. And kind of people understand that this is something that happens on the animal side. However, I think that it kind of, again, goes both ways. And if you have a negative relationship, or better say it, if you're afraid of your animal, if you kind of you feel that they're afraid of you as well, they're going to avoid you, you're going to avoid them. And I always say, if you're scared, forget about it. And of course, it is normal when you first start. You're going to have some fear. I've had it as well. But you need to put in the effort. And this does not mean that you become this carefree person who just kind of goes in and does whatever they want. No, we still need to respect the animals and respect the wilderness in them. So I always say you have to be cautious because they are a wild species. But you can't be afraid, you can't have this fear, because you won't be able to do your job properly. You won't be able to train the animal. You won't kind of want to train the animal in the same sense if you're afraid of it. So it's definitely something to think about. It is a two-way street, and fear and avoidance can happen on either side of the relationship. So yeah, what does it really mean to work at a zoo, and what should we aim for as zookeepers and animal trainers? So ideally, what we want to do is we want to build positive relationships. We want to develop bonds with our animals. We want them to not be afraid of us. We want them to kind of want to approach us. We want them to kind of trust us. So a confident animal, a happy animal that kind of relies on you for some of the things in its life, but also has a healthy life outside of your relationship, I think that's the ideal. So we want this trust that animals will have in us, so they will know what they can expect from us, and they will all be good things, hopefully. And we also want to be able to trust our animals as well. So this means that we kind of also have our own expectations, our own predictions. This happens as a result of time we spend together, and what we talked about earlier, it happens as a result of learning the language of the animals in our care. So we need to know what they mean when they perform certain behaviors, what they mean when they move their ears, their whiskers, their paws, their fins. We need to understand what they're telling us, because animals are always, always, always communicating with us, and we need to know to learn. We need to learn. We need to know their language. This way, we can also kind of check ourselves. So we also are able, of course, to communicate back. We can kind of mind our own gaze, our own movements, our own gestures. So we need to be very, very mindful of what we bring into the relationship as well, into the interaction. So we need to be able to read their language. We need to also be able to speak their language. And that way we can kind of communicate in a way that is efficient, that can kind of yield positive results from both our perspective and the perspective of our animals. And then finally, all of this through time, through repeated interactions, through history of interactions, trust develops and confidence develops. So I consider myself to be very, very lucky because I get to work with a wide variety of animal species. And in many cases, again, I would say I was very, very lucky to kind of be able to work with several individuals within each of these species. So I can really tell you from my own experience as well, some of the things that we discussed earlier about how even within the same species, within the same group as well, you will have individuals with completely different personality types and personalities and behaviors. And I think it's just such a good, positive challenge to kind of find common grounds with not only different species, but again, within the same species, different individuals. And I think all of us who work with a kind of group of social animals will be able to say kind of the same, I think. So there's differences between them, and they bring out different parts of you, and they kind of get you to kind of alter your behavior, your approach to training, your approach to husbandry. And over time, of course, you learn these things, how to best ask for things you need from the animal, and also how to best give them what they need from you, whether it's reassurance or just get them to kind of come to an area for some reason, whether it's a medical examination or something else. I think it's really something that definitely not only enriches them, hopefully, but also enriches us as people who get to kind of build these very unique relationships. And I think definitely it is one of the best parts of this job, because you get to have animal friends in a way. And of course, the bonds and the relationships that we build with our animals in our care at zoos or even sanctuaries, they are different to those that we build with our own pets at home. And there's even a body of research now that's been published that kind of suggests as well that there are differences. But still, I think it doesn't need to be comparable even. I think within their own kind of realms, they're worthy and they're amazing. And, you know, in addition to being able to have our pets and the relationships with them, we get to have also these other relationships and these other bonds. And I think they just make us better for that. One of my favorite things personally is just seeing how animals and how our interactions have changed over time. So I've been working as a zookeeper / animal trainer for nearly 3 years now. And of course, when I arrived, the situation was different. I needed to kind of get to know the animals. I needed for them to get to know me. And there were, of course, challenges. But again, you have to be patient. You have to put in the effort. You have to put in the time and allow for the time to pass. And with time, with repeated kind of positive interactions, relationships really do change and they do become more positive, and I'm gonna say they become wonderful. And for example, these are my Chinese leopards, a male and a female. They're very, very different, completely distinct personality types. They're very lovely. They're both very, very lovely, but the male is very cautious. I feel like he needs more reassurance sometimes, but I feel like he trusts me completely. The female is very kind of reward oriented in our interactions. If we're training, she will kind of perform whatever I ask of her, regardless of whether I'm alone or with a student or with 10 students. But just seeing them relax completely around me, play, groom each other, even fall asleep completely, it's been amazing. What I also wanted to say is that even if you don't have a training protocol for a particular species you work with or a particular animal, if you have time during your day, and of course it doesn't have to be every day, but whenever you have free time, maybe during your break, it is good to spend time with your animals. So what I would do with my leopards, for example, as we're on the subject of leopards right now, during my breaks, I take my coffee and I come to the service area near their enclosure and I spend my break with them. And over time, I've noticed they would come close to me. So I would sit, of course, on the other side of the fence, maybe just on my phone or just kind of being completely non-threatening. Especially in the beginning, this was important. I would just sit there, have my coffee, text, talk to my friends, whatever. They would come close to the fence on their side and just lay there. So in a sense, they kind of act like domestic cats in a way. So they come, they seek this kind of contact. They like to be near me. That's my perception again. But it's very noticeable as well. They come close to me, they fall asleep, literally they fall asleep on their side, and it's really, really amazing to see them completely relaxed. They're very playful, they're very gentle with each other, especially the male. He's very gentle towards the female, and just being able to kind of being allowed to witness their life like that, it's amazing. Another wonderful thing that happens as a result of spending more time keeping those interactions positive is that it builds trust, and that trust allows you to care for your animals better. So it allows you to get closer to them, to examine them, and this way, for example, in the sense of this medical training, you're able to kind of protect them better, to kind of increase their overall welfare, maybe to get them very, very used to being examined in the first place. So when something happens, they're more comfortable during those examinations. And also, by being able to examine them perhaps 3-4 times a day or even once a day, it allows you to kind of see if something happens sooner. So if there's anything that went wrong, if there is an injury or a cut or a broken tooth, for example, you're able to see it when it happens almost. And that way you can improve their health quicker than if you weren't training them. So you see kind of the benefits, they just keep on kind of being added to this list. So not only does it feel amazing to kind of have this amazing animal trust you, this is Pamela, by the way, our female sea lion, but you can also trust them. So what I mentioned before, you're not scared because you know already, you've been through the motions so many times, so you know what to expect from the animal. The animal is not scared either because they know what they can expect from you. So they're relaxed, you're relaxed. Of course, you're probably both cautious. I know I am always in a way because, again, they're still a wild species. So, you know, even your dog can potentially injure you, even unwillingly. So always keep that in mind. It's not to scare anyone, but just I think it's important to have respect for the wilderness in your animals. I think I've mentioned it already. But yeah, think about it as well like that. So this kind of building a relationship, it helps you take better care of your animals. So we talk about training a lot, so I just want to make sure that we all understand what we mean when we say certain things. And this is the way that I teach it to my students. This is one of the things in which psychology, I think, comes in quite handy in my zoo career, zoo work. So essentially, we have two ways of teaching, training, however you want to say it, and basically that's either for reinforcement or for punishment. So if we reinforce certain behavior, we kind of increase the chance, we increase the likelihood of it happening again. If we punish a behavior, we decrease the chance of it happening again. Okay, so both reinforcements and punishments can be positive and negative. And this is where sometimes the students get confused. So how I explain to them is I say, just think of it in the same way you would think about positives and negatives in maths. So positives, it means we add something, we give something. Negative, we take something away. Okay, so we have positive reinforcement. So we want to give something in a way that will kind of reinforce the behavior and make it likely or more likely to happen again. So for positive reinforcement, we give something that the animals like. So we give them a treat, we give them a toy. Similarly, we can also reinforce by taking something away. But in this case, this will be something that they do not like. So we take away something that they perceive negatively. Again, this will still reinforce the behavior, so it will still increase the likelihood of it happening again. Ideally, we would only use reinforcements in our training and not punishments. Punishments are not great for building positive relationships, but I will explain very briefly. Positive punishment, again, we give something, but we want to decrease the likelihood of it happening again, of this behavior. So we need to give them something they do not like. You will hear these stories of how zookeepers of, days of old, they used to spray the animals with hoses, even hit them. Horrible examples. I would strongly discourage anyone from ever using anything like that. So you don't want to punish your animals, especially not in a positive way. Positive in this sense means to give something, because you have to administer something they do not like. You want to decrease the chance of behavior. You want to punish the behavior. Okay. Negative punishment, you take something away, something they like. The way I say to my students, like, I take your phone. You're punished. I took something away. You're not gonna come again. You're not gonna like me. Like I said, ideally, we want to use positive and negative reinforcement. We want to enforce behaviors we like, we need. And punishment, I would say, unless, your life is at stake, unless something very urgent and very dark is happening, do not use punishment, because it's very hard to come back from that. And again, you don't want to punish your animals. You want to have a trusting, loving relationship with them. So, positive reinforcement, the way to go, definitely. And then if necessary, also negative reinforcement. You want to remove things that they might have around that they don't like. A good way to establish positive relationships with the animals you care for is to offer them lots and lots of enrichment. So, enrichment is something that we use in order to encourage natural behaviors. So, we want our animals to behave as much as possible as they would in the wild. Of course, in the beginning of working with a new species or a new group or a new animal, it is very good to kind of try to associate yourself in their mind with something positive, whether that's treats or toys or just overall positive experiences. And when we talk about enrichment, of course, using food is something you can do with most species, and of course, you're going to use something that is species appropriate. In this case, you can see my brown capuchin monkeys with a little summer treat I made for them. So this is actually ice cream, blended fruit that's been frozen, and it gives them a little bit of a chance to cool down during the summer heat, some heat waves in Croatia. Other than using food, of course, or toys, you want ideally to also mentally challenge your animals, give them something they have to think about a little bit, maybe, give them some challenges that are not always very easy to solve. That way you can keep them occupied in a more kind of, for a longer time period and in a more meaningful way. Of course, for animals that are social, you are also kind of a social stimulus yourself. So you can kind of think about yourself as a way of kind of enriching their days as well. So if you go there, especially if you don't show up empty-handed, it's a good thing, especially in the beginning when you're just starting to establish a relationship. But also over time, they will kind of associate you with positive outcomes, positive experiences, and sometimes your presence will be enough. Of course, in cases where you have an animal that's been isolated, maybe for medical reasons or just because there's some social dynamic that is not really going well for this particular individual, you might be at that time the only kind of social interaction for this animal. So there's a lot of potential there that you can kind of you can do a lot of good by just being there and showing some support, being a friend in a way to your animals. So I think it's very important to kind of not forget about that, because of course ideally you want for your animals, if they're social species, to be surrounded by conspecifics, but what research has showed is that even the zookeepers are sometimes viewed as conspecifics by some of the animals, such as primates. So what can happen is they can even kind of, when they get very comfortable, very relaxed around you, if they like you, they might try to groom you. And for me personally, it's one of the highest honors that have ever been kind of bestowed. So yeah, I think, there's all different types in which you can kind of enrich your animals' lives and days. And it's something that really has been shown so many times to influence their welfare positively. And of course, it is something that can contribute to development of a positive relationship. While we're on the subject of capuchin monkeys, something that I found to be really wonderful is that once, I got the trust of adult animals when they had their babies, they were still quite relaxed around me, even with their babies. And now the babies of those mothers are much more kind of confident in approaching me. Than kind of babies of mothers who were more shy and with whom I wasn't able to kind of build such good relationships, who were kind of always just more keeping their distances. So I think it's an added benefit because, I think it's one of those things we know anecdotally. When an animal trusts you, they will let you kind of get to know their not their parents, their offspring as well. And I think it's good to kind of think about that, because you want to have those good relationships regardless, but especially if you know that your animals might be in the breeding program, or they just might kind of reproduce, even if they're not in a breeding program. For example, if you have a petting zoo and you have goats, you're going to want to have a good relationship with the baby goats as well, with the kids. Why not? And yeah, I think it's something to also consider. You kind of also want to be able to start building those new relationships with the new animals as soon as possible, because then, during their socialization process, they will also get to know you. And it's just a good overall thing, I would say, because, you will have kind of maybe surpassed some of the potential challenges that would have otherwise arisen later in their lives. So yeah, think about that as well while you look at this very cute capuchin baby. Of course, in some cases, and this will, mind you, be completely out of your control in many situations, you will not be able to start fresh with an animal, and you will likely not be the first human that this animal gets to know, gets to experience. So what should you do if you have fearful animals? How do you kind of approach to building relationships with them? So the first thing that is important to keep in mind is that nothing happens or even needs to happen overnight. So allow for time and be patient, and always respect your animals. Allow them as much ability to make their own choices as possible and as is safe. This is another situation in which it is very, very important to be able to understand the animals and to communicate back to them. For example, if they're letting you know that they are scared, it is very, very important to understand this information. And equally important, and don't get upset now, is you need to leave your ego at the door, because sometimes the thing that your animals will be scared of is you. In this case, respect that they have their reasons, even if you disagree, and just give them space. With time, they will learn that there is no reason to be scared of you, and they will learn to trust you. And of course, it is very important to follow their pace and to build this trust on their terms. I have included a photo of my wolves here, as they're definitely the most cautious of the animals or species in my care. And you know what? It actually makes it that much more rewarding when there's a shift in their behavior, even a slight one, towards a more trusting, more relaxed one. Generally speaking, however, so not only with the particularly fearful animals, I believe that one of the most important goals should be to eliminate or minimize fear of anything that they do not need to be afraid of. Why? Because ideally, we want our animals to be relaxed in as many situations that might arise as possible. So from having you around doing your work to having bigger, noisier crowds, which will happen in a zoo. And of course, ideally, we want them to not be fearful around veterinarians. And how do we achieve that? I think the first step is to include the veterinarians in the training sessions as much as possible. At first, they can just be present, they can observe you, and this way the animals can get used to their scent and to their presence. However, if and whenever and wherever possible, veterinarians should also take part in training. Why is this important? Because when it comes to diagnosing things, my touch and my view, it is not the same as that of a wildlife veterinarian. So it is very beneficial to teach your animals to allow to be examined by veterinarians on regular basis, because that way, when there is a more serious situation and a veterinarian needs to examine your animal, to the animal this will be just another Wednesday. So we don't want them to be scared of things they don't need to be scared of. So this definitely includes veterinarians. So when I first started working at the zoo, the wolves hadn't been trained before, so I was kind of starting from zero in one sense. However, in another sense, I was kind of given an opportunity to work with a group that was very fearful, as I mentioned, not very trusting of people, they've had some not ideal interactions in the past. So what I did, again, just as I said before, I just had a lot of patience and also a lot of treats. So essentially, I would just come, I would kind of whistle as a signal for them to kind of know that I want them to come, that I'm coming to begin with, actually. And why do I whistle and not call them? Because we want to kind of make those signals as kind of generalizable as possible. So in case I'm not there, in case somebody else takes over from me, it's easier for them to whistle than to kind of try to mimic my voice, especially if they're a man. So what I did was just whistle them in, and then when they would come, I would just reward them with a treat. So the way this works is if they perform behavior I like, they get a reward. But as I said before, we don't punish them. I never use punishment. So what happens if they disobey, quote unquote? What happens if they don't do what I ask them to do? Essentially what happens is nothing. So I walk away, they do not get the reward. And that's it. There's no other punishment. What is really important to also kind of note here is that you should never be the only source of food for animals. So if you do that, essentially you're not giving them a choice, because then they know they have to come to you if they want to eat that day, and that's not great. That's not great. You want animals that are happy, that come to you because they want something additional, they want something extra, they like you, they want to spend time with you, or they want this treat which is something additional to what is already on their menu for the day. So if there's something that you need to urgently train, if there's maybe some medicine that you need to give to your animal, I would say on kind of short-term basis, it's okay, it's acceptable to maybe decrease the food intake of your animals, to kind of alter their menus a little bit, but just be mindful about it, and don't do it any longer. That is absolutely necessary. Try to minimize the duration of that, and then as soon as you've established kind of this baseline, this new baseline, or achieved this kind of urgent goal that you had, just go back to regular kind of based training, and that way the animals know that they have a choice, and if they don't feel like training that day, nothing's gonna happen. So this is what I mean when I say allow for time to pass, be patient, because it's the same as with people, the same as with all of us. Not every day is our day. So some days, again, it will also not be your day as a trainer, so some days you will just not be able to do it. You will maybe have an injury, something, not something bad, hopefully, but you'll maybe have something has happened to you, or you're on your period, you're in pain, the weather is not great, and you're a meteoropath, so you're suffering a little bit, and just like that is the same with animals. So they might not have their day, they might not be in the mood, they may be tired, they might be hot, so it's very, very hot, for example, it's the summer, they don't feel like eating, training, doing anything, they don't even want to be there. So you need to respect that and don't push it. Like, there's no need to kind of drag them by their tails, I like to say. So be patient, and just, you're gonna try again later, you're gonna try again tomorrow, and that's fine. So this is something that should be a source of happiness for both of you. And when they see that there's no pressure and that nothing bad happens, they will feel more liberated. So again, you're giving them more choices, you're giving them more freedom, and that can only increase, your relationship with them. It can only kind of be a positive thing. So never rush anything. There's always time. And you should always plan your work in such a way that there is time. So for example, if you know that you have a young animal that is very likely to go to another zoo at some point, as soon as possible, as soon as the animal, depending on the species, of course, and other things like the enclosure design and so on, try to train it, to go into a crate, for example. So first, you habituate it to the crate's presence, and then slowly, you build the behavior you need. So that way, a year down the line, 2 years, however many years down the line, when it is time for the animal to be moved to a different zoo, the animal already knows what to do. They will go into the crate, fearless, everything's fine. And that way, again, we don't want the animals to be afraid of anything they don't need to be afraid of. So allow for time, think in advance, plan things as much as possible. It's not always possible, but as much as possible. And that way you eliminate stress from the animal and also from yourself. Again, once the animal trusts you and is relaxed around you and knows that nothing bad will happen to it when you're around, and only positive things are happening, only rewards are coming, you can kind of build on from there and train behaviors that you need to take better care of the animal, to be able to kind of monitor their health, for example, their weight as well, and also to make your job easier as well. You want to be able to kind of have the animal come to you when you need to kind of put it in a different part of the enclosure, to clean the initial part of the enclosure. You want them to kind of come in general when you call them, because recall training, it's very important. It can be very kind of it can make a big difference in some situations when it's very, very important for them to come to you at a particular time, because there's something happening, there's a hole in the fence that you just seen and you want to kind of secure it. So there's so many reasons for that. So there's lots of things that we train our animals, and again, that's only possible if the animal trusts you to begin with and is relaxed around you. And yeah, it really opens up so many opportunities, and you get to have less stress at your job, you'll get to do it safer, and the animal gets to feel safe. It's just so much better than the alternative. And now we arrive at a topic that is very important, but that too often gets overlooked, and that is the well-being of people working with zoo animals. So we talk a lot about animal welfare, but the welfare and happiness of people who take care of the animals matters too. Sadly, too many people in our field are often very eager to dismiss this topic and say, oh, I care about animals, full stop. They often don't really realize that in order to take care of the animals, it is imperative to also take care of the people who take care of the animals. It can be very, very hard, I don't have to tell you, working as a zookeeper, and it can be very physically and emotionally demanding and even draining at times. It is not also the kind of work you can clock out of, and more often than not, we take our work home as well, and we feel very proud of that because we feel that we achieve our highest potential and we feel very fulfilled by the job we do. We spend our own time learning and our own money, often buying toys, buying equipment that will allow us to build better enrichments. So at our best, at our most productive, we just can't really, tune out of the whole zoo world because we don't want to tune out. We really enjoy our work, we enjoy our animals, we enjoy the relationship we build. But it can also be very unsustainable because it is, again, not the kind of job that really ends when you leave your place of work. So it is very easy to give too much and over time to just feel completely burnt out, to feel exhausted, to feel you even potentially sometimes have some injuries. Your just body is kind of demanding of you to kind of have a break, but there is no time for a break, and it can really kind of add up. It is very, very important to kind of keep this in mind because if you want people who will be able to, over long periods of time, hopefully years and decades, be able to kind of give their best, keep their animals happy and healthy, and kind of keep also improving themselves and improving their level of job performance, they need to be satisfied, they need to be happy. So we need to make sure that our zookeepers are happy and well taken care of. We need psychologists in zoos. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I think they should really have a place in all of the HRs across zoos because you really need somebody to kind of keep track of people and to make sure that they are feeling seen and heard and supported. So at a very kind of minimum, I feel like we need to kind of make sure that everybody has enough equipment, enough working clothes and shoes, all that kind of stuff, so that they can perform their jobs in a safe way. They also need to feel supported and given opportunities to have further education classes or courses even, and they should also ideally feel that somebody is there kind of making sure that their well-being is also taken into account. So a happy person will also be more likely to give more. We already know this from many other areas, and I think zoos are no exception. It is, again, a very hard job, and even on a good day, you really do give your all there. Of course, not every day is a good day, and all these animals that we really love and hold very close to our hearts, sometimes they get sick, sometimes they die, sometimes they even get moved to different zoos, and we have to deal with this. Psychologically, we need to kind of be able to process these emotions, and we need to kind of find a way to continue, because I don't think the solution is to kind of give less of yourself and to kind of diminish your output, to try not to get as bonded. I think that's not the correct way to approach this type of work, because I think we actually do need those people who are vulnerable and who are willing to be vulnerable and who are willing to give their all and who are willing to build this kind of delicate relationships that they know might end without anything they can potentially even do about that. But we need to ensure that there is a system in place that takes care of people and shows them support in situations like that when their animals have gone to a different zoo or even passed away. So I think there is a lot of space here to improve things, and just in general, I think it is very important to begin with just recognize that it is very, very important to invest in people. And we talk a lot about, as I said, animal well-being and investing in their assessment of their welfare and trying to improve things for them as much as possible, but we definitely should not neglect the human factor, because we need to kind of make things good and functional for people as well, and that way it will translate into what they're able to do and how much they're able to give to their animals as well. So, as we approach the end of today's presentation, I would like to tell you about one of my deepest, most meaningful human-animal relationships that I have so far experienced at the zoo. This is the story of Baloo, a young black howler monkey female. Without going into too much detail, I will just say that the circumstance of her life left her isolated from her group, and in an effort to try to provide her with some company and social support, we would spend as much time as we could with her. After a few years, she got transferred to a zoo in the Netherlands, and this was happy but also kind of devastating. We were very, very happy, very excited for her to be starting a new adventure, a new life in a good place. but also we found ourselves quite heartbroken as this would put an end to our relationships with her. However, sometimes in life you get a little bit lucky, and last autumn I was able to visit Baloo in her new home. And of course, sometimes when you think about these relationships that you had for your life, not only with the animals but also with people, it is possible to overestimate the closeness that you had developed. But this was not one of those times, and when I saw Baloo and when she saw me, she recognized me, and she came to me all the way to the mirror, to the glass, as close as she could, and she behaved exactly as she would behave all those years ago at our zoo. She was happy and she was excited, and for me that meant, okay, our relationship has stood the test of time and separation. So I think that I can say, in fact, we actually shared a bond. It was such a beautiful moment, and I cannot lie, it was very emotional, both with me and my friends who came with me, and we all teared up. And it was very, very hard to leave her again, and it always makes me wonder how these animals perceive these separations. I can only hope that they don't think that we no longer love them when we have to spend time apart, or even say our goodbyes to them forever. So I hope they can feel just how special they are to us, and what a privilege it is to get to love someone so lovely. And on this lovely, slightly nostalgic note, I will end my presentation today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of my talk, and thank you for inviting me. I hope you have enjoyed me sharing some of my results and my own experiences of working at a zoo. And if you are at all interested in talking about human-animal relationships or bonds, please do get in touch. Feel free to message me on any of these lovely platforms that we have available. And I'm always happy to discuss these topics or any other animal behavior or zoo related topics. So yes, please be in touch, and thank you again very, very much.